Are we ready? Yeah? Okay, cool. So we have our quarterly audit committee. It's the first one of the fiscal year. So it is 5 o'clock and we can get started. We'll pass it on to you, Myra.
Thank you, Dr. Acevedo. Good afternoon, trustees here in Ms. Acevedo. My name is Myra Rodriguez. Next month, but tomorrow's regular Board of Trustees meeting, which is the full activity report. And I'll go ahead and get started. As you all know, the internal audit charter requires that I provide the board quarterly reports on the implementation of our annual audit plan. I'm also providing a status on the corrective action plans, and I have a short summary of the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline reports that we've received fiscal year to date. But ultimately, the purposes of our report is for accountability purposes to demonstrate to the board that internal audit's efforts to meet your mandate as a board. The current fiscal year plan for the 2023-2024 fiscal year was approved in April of 2023 and included 14 planned engagements. Since the beginning of this fiscal year, we've had to add 2 engagements to the plan. The first is a corrective action plan follow-up review for the interlocal cooperative contract purchases audit. The reason we had to add it was because we had an activity that was originally due last fiscal year but wasn't implemented, so we had to roll it over to this year, and since then it's been implemented and we've closed out that cap. The second is also a corrective action plan follow-up review, and that was added to address findings from an investigation of pre-K class size concerns at an elementary school. And the implementation for the cap will be also the current year. That brings the total engagement count to 16. At this point, I believe that adding these 2 projects should not affect our ability to implement and complete the original 14 engagements on the plan that were included in the plan. I wanted to provide an overview of the typical audit engagement process for the benefit of new trustees, but we don't have any new trustees. So unless you all have any questions, I can skip this part of the presentation.
I met with Ms. Martinez, Myra, regarding this overview process, and I thought it was great. This flow chart, if that's what we want to call it, it just helped me understand better. And I was always the understanding that, and as I shared with you, the caps were before the audit, and it's the audit and then the caps.
Right.
And I really, because in the world that I came from, it was an improvement process prior to an audit, but in your world, it's this way.
Yes.
And this made a world of difference. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad. Yes, in the audit world, it's first the audit and then corrective action to address any findings. And then as you see, through the whole process, we build in the quality assurance and improvement program processes in our department, but yes. And then I also wanted to point out the possible reports that you might get as a trustee that are highlighted in yellow, and also Ms. Ayavedra, you get the draft report, the final report, and the corrective action plan follow-up report. If we have an audit that has no findings, you will just get the final report. You should not get a draft report, and you wouldn't get a corrective action plan follow-up report. Okay. So moving on to the audit plan completion year to date, as of quarter 1, we have completed 6%, which represents one of the 16 engagements in the audit plan, and I'll provide more detail in the slides that follow. However, the good news is we're already working on 63% of the engagements on the plan, which is 10 of them. We have not started working on 5 engagements, and let me provide additional information on that. So for reporting purposes, I'm splitting up the engagements into 2 groups. The first one includes 10 engagements, which encompasses 9 audits and 1 consulting engagement. We 60% of those engagements are in progress. So the top 6 that you see on that list, the activity funds audit, attendance, truancy, ESSER, and PEEMS, and discipline, are all projects that are currently in the either fieldwork or planning process. We have not started working on the GT consulting engagement, maintenance audit, software utilization, and special education program audit. And most of those are scheduled for the spring semester. We believe the software utilization audit can start before that, probably later in the winter. For those projects that are in the fieldwork phase, I don't have any results to provide yet, but I did want to share with the board and the superintendent, Ms. Saavedra, just the objectives and the scope of those engagements that we've developed as a result of our planning phase and our engagement level risk assessment. I want to also disclose that for efficiency purposes, there are 3 audits that we've combined, that we are combining because they all take place at the campus. So we just thought it makes sense if one auditor is going to a campus, instead of doing one audit, we can knock out 3 at once. So that includes the activity audits, the activity funds audits, the truancy audits, and the attendance audits. As it relates to activity funds, the objectives of the audit are to determine if campus staff are following the procedures outlined in the campus accounting manual as it relates to the collections, the collection of funds, deposits, and disbursements and transfers between agency funds. And the scope of this audit is the current school year. So we will just be looking at current year activity. When we met during our entrance meeting with school leadership, that was a concern that they had, that if we were auditing for prior years, how could the principal for the current year, if it changed, how would they address it? But we don't have to worry about that since we're just looking at the current year activity. The next audit, again, it's going to be one of those combined one, is for attendance. Our objectives of the audit will be to determine if, again, school staff are following TEA's Student Attendance Accounting Handbook, also known as the SAW, and the district's attendance procedures as it pertains to attendance is taken and recorded accurately, as well as self-audits are completed by principals and submitted to school leadership. And just to elaborate on A, sounds very simple, but what we're actually looking at, because this is a pretty extensive audit, is we're looking to determine and confirm if schools, to make sure that schools are not submitting attendance for students that are not enrolled at the campus, that all students have a scheduled class during the accounting period to make sure they're being counted and we're getting ADA for those, that campus administrators and attendance clerks are taking the required attendance training, that teachers have access to record attendance and are taking attendance daily during the accounting period as required. Attendance records support the absence reason codes, which ensures that we have the most accurate data that we're submitting to the state. And we're also going to be inquiring with principals on the cause when there's instances of excessive unverified absences, as well as those coded as no call, because in those instances, we don't even have a chance to get any funding. We've reached out to TEA, and we believe we'll also be able to estimate the funding that we would lose as average daily attendance. Again, it would be an estimate based on, that could be lost due to those absences as unverified and no call. And I think this will go a long way in having principals kind of revisit and really try to understand the cause for that, and either implement some sort of corrective action or ask for help if that's what they need in order to make sure they have the most accurate coding. And that's it for attendance. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question on the attendance audit. As you listed a number of things, I guess overarching with that, will there be an opportunity for the audit team to also, I guess, explore the level of consistency from campus to campus as you all, in terms of procedures and how they go about approaching their attendance procedures?
Yes, and I think that would be, we will be doing from several campuses, right? So we will be able to compare the findings. What I committed to school leadership is to also kind of provide a summary at the end of the most common findings. But I think even within those audits, we'll be able to see if there are certain campuses that have For example, more no note, no calls or unverified absences compared to others. And then in the end, hopefully this can be a tool for school leadership to use as they're monitoring moving forward, or even for us to think, because we've changed our procedures from last year, so every year we kind of learn, let's add this procedure, this one wasn't as, as high risk. So even that to guide us in different ways to move our audits. But I think this is one of the audits that I'm really excited about, because we've made some changes that I think even just the funding alone can really provide the impact to principals so that they understand, what the true impact would be to the district financially. And then the other audit that's going to complement that well, I think it's this one, the truancy audits. And these will be, we'll be checking to ensure that campus staff are notifying parents when students have 3 or more unexcused absences within a 4-week period. And on top of that, we'll also be asking, ensuring that campus staff have developed a 45-day attendance plans for those students that received a notice of absence. So I think this kind of complements the attendance well, because if the school has more of a truancy issue than attendance, then maybe we can find some of the reasons for that here. For all of those 3 audits, the scope will be the current fiscal year, the school year. So we do believe it's relevant, it's timely, it's going to provide principals and those supervisors of the principals information that they can use to take corrective action timely, because not only is it that we're doing it right now, we don't report attendance till the summer of 2024. So we still have an opportunity to take action that may correct some of those issues with unverified and no notes that may be incorrect. Okay. And then the last audit that is in the fieldwork phase is the elementary and secondary school emergency relief audit, better known to everyone as ESSER. We will be, our objectives include to determine if the district is implementing the use of funds plan that we submitted to the TEA, meaning are we using funds as we told TEA that we were going to be using them. We'll also be looking at the monitoring process that the department overseeing the funding has in place to make sure that the funds are being spent timely and in their entirety before the September 30th, 2024 grant end date. And we'll also be looking at one of the compliance requirements for the grant, which is that a minimum of 20% be spent on learning loss projects. And the scope of the audit, again, will be the ESSER 3 grant, which has a period of availability from March 2020 to September 30th, 2024. Any questions?
I think I really like these 4 slides on kind of saying like this is what we're working on. Just really appreciate that. And since Trustee Cuellar walked in a little late, since it's only 1 slide, can we go back to the slide that you had prepared for the new
Sure.
trustees?
Yes.
And kind of go over that, and then we could move on to the next slide on CAP follow-ups.
Okay. So I included this slide for the benefit of the new trustees, so thank you for being here, Trustee Cuellar. I just wanted to kind of explain, because I think understanding the different phases will let you know where we are with our audits as I'm providing the status reports. So you can see that the different steps in a typical audit engagement process are outlined at the top. An audit engagement itself typically starts with the planning phase, followed by the fieldwork and the reporting. So those 3 phases really are the main ones. But within each phase, there's different very critical audit steps that we take, and I would say the most are probably in the planning phase itself. One, because we make sure that we have the proper resources allocated to the engagement. That means that we have staff that's qualified and knowledgeable in order to carry out the engagement. We also gather sufficient information relevant to the area that we're auditing so that we can do an engagement level risk assessment, and having that, conducting the risk assessment while always considering opportunities of how we can support EPISD and meeting its strategic priorities is really going to get us to the right objectives for the audit. Along with the objectives, we define the scope, the specific audit procedures, and then we communicate with the audit client throughout, from the beginning, when we let them know that this audit's coming, all the way to the end where we have a formal entrance meeting where we let them know the specific objectives of the audit, the scope, and we agree upon the criteria that we're going to use, as well as the expected communications and timelines for the audit. I think the field work is pretty, it's straightforward. This is when we do the test work. This is when we implement our audit procedures, and we determine if there's any findings. And based on those findings, we brainstorm on the recommendations that would best address any issues that we find, as well as the root cause. The third phase of an audit, and typically the audit would be considered after this, is the reporting phase. This is where we prepare the draft report. We have our formal, what we call our exit meeting with our clients. This is where we discuss the findings. We provide one final opportunity to provide any additional information we may have missed before we finalize we have the final audit findings, and we issue the formal draft report. The draft report will go to those in the district that have the authority and the ability to implement a corrective action. That way, they come up with the plan, the activities that will implement it, the timelines. Once they submit the approved corrective action plan to us, we incorporate those activities into the final audit report, and we issue. It's important to note that the draft report also goes to the superintendent and the Board of Trustees, and then the final one, it goes to the same individuals. And the last step in the reporting phase is that we publish the report online. So for an audit, it's kind of where it almost ends, as far as the audit. But as you see, we have a fourth step called quality assurance. And then we also have quality assurance all along the bottom of all of the engagement process. So the reason we do that is, as a fourth step, our staff conduct basically self-audits of our working papers. It's, for example, if Arely is the lead auditor on the transcript audit, then another auditor, like Tony or somebody else in the department that didn't participate in the audit, would audit her records. And this is to ensure that we have quality working papers, that we've done all the steps that are outlined in our procedures, that we're following our standards, and that ensures that we have that piece done. But throughout the entire engagement, we have an auditor assigned as the lead auditor. We also have a supervisor that oversees each one of the steps in the audit. And again, that's to ensure that we are following the proper procedures, that we are not missing anything. Again, it's part of our quality assurance and improvement program. So, and then the final piece, which would not apply if we had an audit with no findings, but if we do, then the next piece would be just our monitoring, or what we call at EPISD corrective action plan follow-up reviews, where we monitor the implementation of that CAP. And we look for evidence. If there are extensions or changes to timelines, then again, we continue to work on that until all activities are either implemented or no longer needed or relevant. And then once that's been done, we close the CAP and it's done. So it's the audit itself, it's not as lengthy as sometimes the CAP makes it, because of course we just want to make sure that there's corrective action following the audits in order to really be able to provide, add value to the district, I would say. Any questions? Okay. No problem, anytime. So, yes, so after I've provided, I just thought it'd be great to provide objectives ahead of time so that the board knows, what's coming, what we're working on. Ms. Saavedra, so you're aware, I usually provide that to you when we're meeting, but I just thought I'd provide this to the audit committee as well. The second group of engagements that we complete are the corrective action plan follow-up reviews. This year we had originally 4 in the audit plan. We've added 2 for a total of 6, as I mentioned earlier. We've completed 1 of those. There's 4 that are in progress, and there's 1 that has not started, as listed on this slide. The one that we completed was for the interlocal co-op contract purchases audit, the buckets, better known as the buckets audit. In summary, management did implement 7 of the 8 activities in the corrective action plan to address the findings and recommendations in the original audit report. The one activity was not implemented was because management considered it was being addressed to a separate activity. There were some changes that had to be made due to changes in policy, but we do feel that those activities that were implemented addressed the original audit report. So So it says 5, but it's actually 4. So 4 corrective action plans remain open, are in the implementation phase as listed here. The dual language audit cap, payroll, power up, and then we have an investigation into pre-K class size concerns. So the 22.13 is the cap that was fully implemented. As you can see, 3 out of the 4 were still at 0 implementation at the beginning of the year. I mean, as of when I submitted the status report. However, they were at 0 because they didn't have any activities due at that time, which was September 27th. 2305 is the payroll cap, and that one did have 1 activity that had been implemented at the time. The status of activity by cap is provided on this slide. Again, as of the time that I submitted this report, this was the status of activities. Since then, since October, there were quite a few activities that were due. So for example, for the dual language cap, there was 1 activity that has been implemented, and then there's 2 others that are in progress. 23.00-01 was the investigation. That one still remains at 5. However, I know that there was an extension that was approved by Ms. Ayavedra recently to extend 3 activities on that cap to November. My understanding is there's corrective action being taken, but it hasn't been formalized, so the evidence isn't quite ready to be reviewed. But at least they are taking some mitigating they're mitigating the risk through certain monitoring right now.
And I would, just to provide some additional information on that one, I think those activities have to do with developing dashboards and a more solid monitoring system so that we can prevent any issues of this nature happening after the fact. And so we're really addressing not necessarily just the cap for that specific campus, but we're addressing it in the form of an organizational monitoring system. So we're working through Tableau to develop some specific dashboards along with some specific protocols and expectations on how school leadership would monitor that on an ongoing basis, so we would never get to a point where there was misrepresentation of pre-K or kindergarten class sizes.
Correct. It's
Within the
just to
system.
monitor for those types of risks. And like you said, I think the great thing about it's an opportunity to really monitor district-wide rather than to just, address that one, the campus issue.
Right.
2306 is the Power Up audit. Since then, the one activity that was under audit review has been implemented. There's 2 more activities that were due, I believe, just this month also. 9:30. We're reviewing them with the administrators overseeing the implementation of those. It has to do with assets and tracking down some assets, and meeting with students, I think at one of the campuses. Surplus items.
And then the other one is students having devices.
Okay. Okay, so yes, that's right. So to determine if students needed devices, and then some surplus items. So I believe that my staff is in contact with the school resources department, as well as with school leadership to determine, where they are with that activity. It may be that those might need an extension if they don't get wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. And then the last one is the 2305, which is the payroll audit, and I believe that remains the same. The due dates for CAP activities are listed on this slide. As you can see, at this point, there were no past due activities, but there were some due in October, like the ones that I just mentioned. So we're working through them with administration. One I haven't mentioned is on dual language. I do believe that there's 2 activities that have been implemented and 2 activities that had delays. One was due to TEA not posting a form that was needed to submit a waiver. So really that was out of our control. But I believe as of this morning, we checked and it's been posted. So admin should be able to follow up and submit a waiver for some ESL and bilingual waivers that need to be submitted to the state.
Yeah, it's my understanding that although the form wasn't posted by TEA, all of the backup data that we would put into the form has been collected by by the department in terms of the waiver information and things of that nature, possibly. So-
And I think the good thing here is that I don't think it's due to TE until November 1st. So even though maybe this activity is not completed for the CAP purposes, as far as the state, I think admin should meet that requirement easily. They do. See, and then the last section of the report is on fraud, waste, and abuse hotline reports. I'm providing a summary for the fiscal year-to-date report count. We've received 43 reports, which is a little lower compared to last year around the same time. I started including the duplicate reports that we've received because that's about 8. So it really is more like 35 unique reports that we've received so far for 23 different locations, and 91% of those have been anonymous. 33 of those reports have been closed, which represents 77% of the reports we've received so far. Only 2 we've determined that were substantiated. One of those was partially substantiated, but neither one of those was considered fraud or waste. As you can see, we get a lot of reports that are really not, they're comments or they're not appropriate for the hotline. I've gone back to Liza because I thought maybe they're submitting they're not submitting it through Let's Talk. We've changed the link again. We've added language. Liza's department even added language because we think that maybe the reason they're doing it is because it says it's a confidential way to submit concerns. To add that language to Let's Talk, because that's another way to submit reports confidentially if you can choose to remain anonymous. So we'll see if that changes. We haven't received that many lately, but but I just think it's important that I let you know that a lot of them really are not really fraud, waste, or abuse. If we look at them by category, you see that the majority are employee relations or not appropriate for the hotline because it's really just a comment. There's nothing really to follow up on. And most of those reports have been related to departments, 49%, versus elementary schools at 19% and secondary schools at 26%, and then the pre-K schools at 7%. And that's it. That's all I have. Unless you all have any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, okay. Just one question, Mike. Hi, how you doing? Good afternoon,
How are you?
everybody. So when you said employee relations, there were 12, and you said there was really nothing to follow up on. Can you elaborate? Do you send those to someone else if it needs to be further investigated by something different than what an internal auditor would do or what your department does?
Yes, absolutely. So the ones that are not appropriate for the hotline are the ones that there's nothing really to follow up on. If it's employee relations, those could be a complaint from a campus, and those are always forwarded to either a campus administrator or to department administrator for follow-up. And we do expect a response for all of those. There are certain reports that may be vague. For example, there might be a complaint about, the discipline. Maybe it'll be a different one, but the discipline here is awful. So then I'll post the message to the caller and I'll ask, do you have specific information? Do you have, maybe a classroom, grade level, specific students, and I never really get a message back, even though they can. So we still send it to the campus just so that they can have for their information and address as they feel needed. And we always copy in the executive principal and the assistant superintendent, so they're also aware in case something more specific should come up in the future. So we do forward to the different areas.
If there are specific, comments made through the hotline that are about a specific employee, ergo, employee relations, I know that in many cases, Myra will bring those to my attention, and we will forward those to HR, should there need to be any follow-up with that as well.
Right.
Once she does an initial overview investigation based on how specific the information is.
Right, and we always try to do, especially if it's more of the audit realm, we try to do a preliminary analysis to see, we look at activity in the system, like in the past, if there's been concerns about grade changes. I actually get with IT, they're wonderful, and they can provide some audit logs, and we can see activity of grade changes, and if we see something, we'll definitely reach out to school leadership, work with them. And if we don't see anything, we'll ask questions. Can you be more specific? We don't see anything. But when there's allegations that seem to be even serious, and we may not have a lot. We'll try to do something to see if we can see any red flags. Anything else? Okay, that's all I have for you all.
All right, no more questions? Okay, great. Well, you did say 30 minutes, and it is exactly 30 minutes. So we could adjourn at 5:30. Thank you,
right.
Myra.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you all for being here.